Hello and welcome to Absolutely Not. My name is Katrina Jones. My pronouns are they, she, he, and I am so grateful that you are here with us today. Real quick, if you appreciate the work that I do here or elsewhere, please visit the Support the Mission page of my website. There are several options to choose from to support my work, so please choose one. The key words for this episode are harm, dismissive, and masking. I encourage y'all to look up the definitions of these words and compare them to the definitions that you carry with you on a daily basis. If you need help comparing, please let me know. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp allows you to connect with one of 24,000 licensed therapists in a safe and private online environment. You pay just a low flat fee for unlimited therapy with your therapist. Visit www.betterhelp.com/absolutely-not for more information and to get 10% off your first month. This link can be found in the show notes. Today's episode is titled, I Have to Choose Me. And that amazing title is brought by my amazing special guest, Katrina Jones, she, her. Katrina is the founder and CEO of Advancing Equity and Inclusion, a diversity, equity, and inclusion and talent consulting and coaching firm. She helps organizations connect their programmatic efforts to comprehensive DEI strategies that help accelerate their progress in building more diverse teams and fostering more inclusive, equitable, and psychologically safe cultures. She believes that when we prioritize closing equity gaps, our workplaces can become spaces of learning and growth where everyone thrives. She identifies as Black, neurodivergent, disabled, and a member of the LGBTQ plus community.
Thank you for having me today.
Oh.
I am honored and excited to be here with you in conversation. Why did I choose that title? I just in looking at what you do and absolutely not and saying no. For me, part of the work that I've been doing and continue to work through is that saying no, part of saying no and absolutely not is about choosing myself and being compassionate with myself. And that is for me is something I have to keep coming back to and keep doing the work to understand what compassion looks like, to be compassionate for self, to focus on myself and to not put myself last, because that is something that is in my history as a cis Black woman who was raised in the South in a Catholic family, and who has seen cis women always serve in these role like in a way that is self-sacrificing, where they, and this is my perception, at times, like they poured themselves so deeply into everyone else, into others, and I didn't see that same pouring into self. I didn't see that same, I do things just for me, like I focus just on me because I matter just as much as everybody else matters. And my, like I said, I grew up Catholic and my relationship continues to evolve in terms of spirituality and religion. And where I'm at right now is, I don't believe that we're here to be these self-sacrificing vessels. I think we also need to pursue joy and our peace during our time on earth, and not always or consistently sacrifice that for others.
Consistently sacrificing yourself for others. One of the
Yeah,
things that cut me really deep up at part of your description was I matter just as much as anyone else. And it
yeah,
really defined that thinking of us giving ourselves to other people is I don't matter as much as anyone else.
yes. So that for me is the I choose myself is because sometimes that framing matters because when you hear that, I mean, even as you repeated it back to me, I was like, damn, that sounds terrible. Like it sounds terrible if you think about it in that way to say, I don't matter as much as anybody else, as much as this person, right? Like I don't matter. What does that say? What does that do for you? What does that do for your self-esteem as a person if the choices that you're constantly or consistently making reinforce that or feed into that in some way? And I love that you grimace, like that you are so visceral in your reaction where it's like I can see the pain of it.
Yeah, because it's a lot of beliefs that have been instilled in us from a very young age, but we weren't educated on where those beliefs stem from or what they
Yeah.
actually mean. The fact that you said if we continue this type of behavior, it reinforces those beliefs. Katrina, who told you that? Who informed you of that?
No, and no one did, right? Like no one has said that. No one has said, you keep feeding the beast, but you do, and you keep feeding it, and it becomes the way that I've seen it play out as is it's a badge of honor. It's a badge of honor that I sacrifice myself um, so that when I go out, everybody's going to talk about how much I loved my family, how much I loved my community, how I did everything. I was always showing up with a plate or always in service to people. And no one, you don't see about or see explicitly deep, like laid out how were people in service to themselves, like how did they pour into themselves.
Hmm. And I promise you, all those badges of honor that you get from people, like, how long do those people even stay in your life? I remember a time when I was collecting badges for a really long time. Those
Yeah.
people, they can have it back. I don't have any of those people in my life anymore. Do you still have people that used to give you badges in your life?
What you said about you can have this back, you can have that. No, thank you. We're done here. Um, yeah, I do. I do have folks I think who, yeah, um, and it is evolving. It continues to evolve in the way that I both set boundaries as well as just recognize and see maybe, and in some instances for the first time, what our relationship is or has been. So I'm more conscientious about that, about where does it feel like I'm giving more, right? And I am always that like reliable friend or reliable, like I'm always the person you can go to and I'm always going to do X when you need, etc. um and it forces me to think about where do I get that in return. um and even that still feels something, and I'm pausing because it's still something that's hard for me to access in some way, but also to acknowledge that yes, I want reciprocity. I, I, and this is the pausing and the hesitating, like maybe I don't want relationships that are 75-20 or 85-15, where it's always me, checking in or doing whatever or etc. or listening and holding space. Maybe, I want reciprocity
Hmm.
across like all my relationships.
And you keep using these words of like, you need to be able to recognize that, like, these are behaviors and ways of living that if you don't recognize it, you'll just continue to get these badges. You'll continue to
Oh, you
collect
do?
badges for the rest
Yes,
of your life. When did
yes.
you stop collecting badges?
I think I stopped collecting badges. There were a few times, like one, sometimes the difficulty of a relationship has caused me to stop collecting that badge. To say, I do not need, and I'm speaking about the relationships because that to me is where a lot of the work lives. But to say, I do not need to preserve this relationship for, not for society, not for myself. I recognize that this is really unhealthy to me and for me. And even if this person is a family member, I don't, I don't have to do this. I don't have to do this just because we are tied by blood. Sorry, I don't. So that is one awakening that I've had that has made me, say no thank you to that badge, is seeing it and just getting to a place where I no longer could continue
Mm.
because it was so hard, it was so difficult, it felt, maybe abusive, even in some instances, and I just had to say no, I can't carry this anymore.
I can't carry this anymore. And for anyone who this is the first time you've ever heard of boundaries or how these relationships need to be reinforced or that you don't need to continuously work hard and trying to preserve them, I hope that you're taking with you that the beginning of these sentences have the word I in front of them. You are in charge or in control of all of this. When was the last time somebody didn't want a relationship to end with you or was convinced that, oh no, we can still preserve this?
Oh, I don't know. I'm trying to think about this because I'm also sometimes indirect, right? So I'm just like, I'm going to disconnect from this. And I don't like, I am not going to engage in the conversation. And part of it is just at that point, it is fully about protecting my peace. And I don't have energy for that conversation to get into, like, I'm not the person who's going to, lay out I, you know, I need to cut ties with you. I've done that before, right? And had that conversation. That has happened. It's been, I'm trying to think, it was probably like 2016 when that happened. And I set it out. Called the person up, talked to him and said, hey, here's what's happening. I need you to know I can no longer be in relationship with you in the same way. And I have to pull back. This is for me. No, sorry, 2000. No, it was 2016. And it just didn't, it sucked. It sucked. It sucked because then we went back and forth, right? And so then it was this push, pull, tug of war. And eventually the person just kind of gave up in
Mm.
that moment. And it was okay. And I'll say gave up. And I also just said, hey, this is and we've been going back and forth. This is it. And there's no going back or hedging this for me. And that felt really, I, at that time, was really destroyed by that because I felt like this person doesn't want me, right? I thought I'd meant so much to them and they are willing to walk away so easily without fighting. Um, and that's part of the reason why I don't engage in that way anymore, because I think, one, because I've also gotten to a place where, um, if I've opened that door into a dialogue in that way, that's not going to be good. Like, what does that give me? If this is the decision, it's the decision.
Mm.
And so where I've made that decision, I don't feel the need to have a, laborious conversation about it. This is the decision. So the last time that I explicitly drew a boundary, actually with a close family member, it was just, hey, this is my boundary. And there was a period at the sentence. And there was no dialogue after that. And that for me felt good because they accepted it. And I was at a place now where I didn't feel like that acceptance was a rejection. It was, this is what I want, and I'm fully committed to this. And you are honoring my boundary when you do not get into a tug of war with me or try to, get me to change my mind or to see things differently. This is what it is.
So much respect for yourself when you don't, like the word that you used was laborious,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
just it's so much more work to be in that tug of war. I love that you're allowing people to make that decision. You can either tug of war or you can just walk out. It's fine. You can,
yeah. Because I mean, and like, what does the tug of war solve? What does it give you? And I find that tug of war, one, I am so spent by the end of it. Like it leaves me really wrecked and in such a bad space. And now I'm spinning a little bit from our tug of war. And I'm spinning and I'm going back to old programming and questioning self-worth and all of these things. And instead of, if the decision is what the decision is, what do we need to dialogue about? And who does that dialogue serve? It probably serves you to be able to unload on me, because at this point, I'm not interested in dialogue, but it probably serves you more. It doesn't serve me. And so I don't have to.
I don't have to. Once again, choosing yourself, because that's what this episode is about. And I love
Yes.
that you're talking about, even in this conversation. I mean, it's an ongoing conversation. It's typically not the first time you brought this conversation up or the first time you've had this conversation. So by then, you are spent. For the people who are in organizations who've like consistently had these types of conversations and are thinking, you know what? Is this turning into a tug of war?
Yeah.
What would you say to them? What would be some of the steps they should do when they feel like it's turning into a tug of war?
I would say honor how you feel. Be able to try to be really present so you can even observe that feeling. And then just because that's where sometimes we get lost, we start to maybe disconnect a little bit from the conversation. And so then we're getting pulled along through it. Be present and be present with what you're feeling in that moment and just see it and honor it, to say, this doesn't, I'm sorry, this conversation does not feel good to me. And it's just as simple as that. This conversation does not feel good to me. It doesn't feel productive, or whatever the adjective is. And I need to stop for and this is where, naming the why. I need to stop for me. I need to stop because I don't have capacity. I will tell people, I don't have capacity for this conversation right now. And you can decide, you can pause it, you could stop it in that moment, and you could go away. You could go away and just, reflect. I would say go away with the goal of, what do you need to do to care for and protect yourself right now? So do you need to make space for coming off of that just roughness and that tug of war? Make space for yourself to just be with whatever is coming up for you, and then, have some time to process and think about, do I need anything else from this? Was this a pause, or was this a stop? Was this a place for me to say, I want to come back to this. Maybe I wasn't in the right headspace. I want to give this conversation a little more time when I'm better equipped to engage. And then going back to that person and finding a mutually agreeable time to engage. Or do I just not want to have this conversation? And then just figuring out a way to message that, to say, you know, we started this conversation about X, Y, or Z. And, you know, I told you I needed to stop the conversation. It didn't feel productive. It didn't feel good for me anymore. You know, I'm letting you know, like, I don't wish to pick up the conversation. Let's leave it as it is.
Mm. And you so many imagery, like you talked about being pulled along the conversation. So if you
Yeah.
feel like you're just being dragged throughout the conversation, like,
Yeah.
wow, this is not a productive use of my time, my energy. There are so many things going on in the world right now, Katrina, and people are definitely going to use that line tomorrow when they walk into the office or in a meeting saying, I do not have the capacity for this conversation. To those people who are fearful about saying that to maybe their managers or people in power or leadership, or do you have any words of encouragement for them?
It's going to feel scary and hard. Like, I'm saying it to you, and because I'm saying it to you and it seems like it's coming from me so fluidly, doesn't mean that that's how it shows up for me. That whenever I do and have said that, that it still feels, I'm still like, my boots are still shaking, right, when I say it. In part because it could be the power dynamics. It could be, it feels risky to stand up for yourself, especially when it's not normalized, or it hasn't been normalized in part of your history and programming to create boundaries and to stand up for yourself. I would say, as the there's a quote, and I can't remember, oh, sorry, who the author of the quote is, but it's something like, speak so loud even when your voice shakes. And so sometimes you just have to say it. You just have to let it out of your mouth as best as you can, and just let go of the idea of what it should sound like and what it should look like. Like, that's the best thing you can do. Because you're going to be nervous and scared and going through also lots of complex emotions that might include anger, you know, and some other things. And so just saying, I can't have this conversation right now, right? And you could just say, I can't do this right now. Like, I'm sorry, I need time, and just, that's it, right? This is a place where you don't have to look for agreement. If you just cannot do it, you just need to voice it and just make that leap for self-preservation. And don't worry about if it's said perfectly or if your voice shakes when you say it. Just say it, because you can always come back and say, hey, you know, cover that up and say, I know that was awkward or whatever, you know, here's what was happening for me. You can always follow up and continue that. And if you feel that you need to apologize or whatever, yes, do that. Whatever you feel like you need to do to just move forward. But in the moment, you know, that is where you really have to choose. You have to do the hard and courageous work of choosing yourself and saying, I can't do this right now. And not about what it looks like and how it looks and what the other person thinks and all, because you will do that, I'm sure. Like, you will probably spin later at some point, and freaking, you can always, and you can address that.
There are so many people who needed that permission to be able to say, I don't have the capacity for this right now. And in self-preservation, we know that you learn so much about the other person you are in relationship with when you start to self-preserve. Have you ever learned about a person you were in relationship with after you started setting boundaries?
Oh, yes, 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 absolutely. Ooh, I see, you know, you see who cares about you, honestly, and who cares more about themselves. Um, it's like, that's the honest part of it, you know. Some people would so have you in this space of serving them, and in this relationship that works exclusively for them, right? So that when you say, hey, this doesn't work for me, just think about that. Like, one of the things I always encourage people to do, and this is part of my work, right, is to think about this as if somebody else, you were talking, advising, or counseling, or coaching somebody else, right? Versus over analyzing in your head of, this is what has happened, and all that. But imagine that. Imagine somebody comes to you and says, hey, I have this difficult relationship that doesn't feel good. And I feel like we're in a place of transition. I need to set a boundary here. There's a lack of reciprocity. And I've shared it with that person, or I've shared some bits of it. And that person's response was, and like, it works for me. I don't know what your problem. I don't know what your problem is. So when I don't know, when I hear that or see that, or something that reflects that, because it's not exact, but when I get a reflection or a response that reflects that, it affirms for me maybe something that I was like 90% or 98% committed to, but still had 2% of hope, of possibility. It's, that possibility is, okay, I know who this person is. And then I come to what would serve me most, right? Like, what would serve me most? Knowing what I know, I've expressed a boundary. This person has, rather than gotten curious about the boundary, about what I need, they've either ignored it, because that's the other thing. Like, some people will just ignore and just skip over it. Like, you didn't, you weren't trying to say, this is not what but ignored it or tried to bargain about it. That's to me, or just rejected it in full, to say, like, you're tripping. Like, okay, so you're completely disregarding my feelings. Okay. We're done here.
And the great thing, I mean, not the great thing about it, but the great thing about it is that's data, baby. Like, you get so much data just from that one interaction. You talked about the 98% and the 2%. The 2% got to get filled up now. The 98% got to get filled up now. We have 100% data now.
Now it is 105%. It's not just 100%. It is 115%. Okay, we went from 2% of, well, maybe, and that's me, like, literally putting that data point in my, oh, okay. Okay, I got it. All right, we're good.
Thank you. And then you move on to choosing yourself. For the people that are going to listen to this and are thinking, okay, Katrina, I am going to choose myself and have a conversation tomorrow, what would be their top 3 tips that you would share with them about having those conversations?
Ooh, this is a great question, because I can share what works for me and what I've learned along the way. And it's also a great prompt for other people to share what works for them, because this is where I believe wholly in the power of crowdsourcing and learning from other people, because some of the things that work for me, like mapping out what that looks like. So what am I asking for? What is this? What is the root of this? I like to map it out literally on a piece of paper, because I'll often have things in my head. And so sometimes, especially if it's, in the workplace or things like that, within an organizational setting, I need to just outline it. I will write in bullet form and just kind of detail, like, here is what has happened. And I'll, from a timeline view, document that and then say, and this is what I need, and here is why, and here is, what I'm asking of the person, or here's what I would like to have. I like to map all of that out as much as possible,
Mhm.
because I like to go into the conversation just really prepared, and clear about my talking points that I want to convey about, maybe about the why, about what my boundary is, or what my request is, and how we move forward. I say this because you also, in some way, need to think about what happens if and when that person rejects or responds in a way that is not aligned with how you'd like the situation to go. So that is also something that is worth, I think, spending a little bit of time on, in terms of like mapping out possibilities. Yes, and the mapping is so important to me because it helps me to workshop my language, um, that I want to share, to be effective, to have the conversation, in a way that I ultimately hope is going to land. I think so those two things, and mapping out the conversation, workshopping your language, also outlining and understanding, the possibilities, like how the person might respond, especially if it's converse to what you hope to happen. I think the third piece of it is figuring out what is your nuclear option. So, if let's say none of this goes the way that you hope it goes, right? Um, what's your nuclear option? And what's your and what that means is, what is the hard line, the alternatives? Like, what is this is my, what I call the black ass bottom line. This is that. And if we go over this, here's what that could mean for me. What are the options and the possibilities for me? And sometimes, you're not in a space where you can realistically do that. I always, historically, have come into this with a lot of hope, and kind of thinking about things in the rosiest possible picture. And when it has not, in those instances when it has not gone, or it's gone really bad, like I've had to think about, okay, like, let me map out really quickly, what am I going to do after this on the fly. So to the extent that you can, just kind of thinking about, what is that bottom line, what are the alternatives, and then the last thing I will advise is just, and what is my plan for care after this, after I've done this really hard thing? What is my plan to care for myself? I am always intentional about the logistics of, like, the timing. When do I want to have this conversation? I never want to have a conversation like at the beginning of my day, because now it's with me for the rest of the day. I want to have this at the end of a day, not the end of a day on Monday, but like maybe the end of a day on a Thursday, or Friday even, because then I can go straight into my self-care plan. I can go straight to whatever that is for me. I'm going to go, like, wrap myself in a weighted blanket and take a bubble bath and do all the things that I need to do to soothe after doing a really hard thing.
Hmm. And a lot of times, and well, one, thank you so much for those amazing tips. There is a past version of myself who's like, man, I wish I had known.
Yeah.
Especially the workshopping of the language, because emotions are activated in those conversations. And
Oh,
if you don't have an outline, then you'll go off script.
that is why I workshop. That is why I believe in workshopping. For me, part of workshopping is about, I grew up like I said, in a really in a Catholic household. I grew up in the South, um, uh, in a I'll say traditionally Southern Black family, and I was socialized that, you need to repress. You can't express your emotions or feelings. Um, uh, it's not safe to do so. They're not respected or wanted. And so as an adult, it's, you're just so buttoned up. You're so buttoned up and used to stuffing things down. And when you can't stuff, it comes and you're responding and it's emotionally charged, it comes out sometimes in really unexpected ways. Like for me, sometimes things, and I have been afraid of how things would come out and what I might say. And so workshopping is helpful for me just to make sure that I'm clear in my language, that I'm thoughtful about what I'm communicating, and that I I'm also, while I'm workshopping language, workshopping my emotions in that.
Because they got to go somewhere. At some point, you need to have the actual cuss out conversation that you wanted to have, but
Yes.
then you need to have the productive and effective conversation that's going to get us to move forward. Because cussing people out doesn't get us anywhere. It just
Doing my best, right? Like, and you know how it cuts off conversation, even, like come into the conversation. But as soon as somebody starts cussing you out, it's like, oh, okay. Well, this is a different, like, we have gone somewhere else now.
off the map.
Right. And yes, productive, but also just like managing those emotions and being able to think about and have I'll say a preview. And this is for me, like this is about putting myself first, is let me honor what's coming up, at least initially. It may not be what comes up in the conversation at all, or completely, but I need to honor like that first reaction. If it's rage, if it's anger, if it's like frustration, if it's the cuss out, like I need to just honor that and then process a little bit. That workshop is processing.
With yourself. So much practice and conversations with yourself needed to have internally before having those external conversations, because you have all the answers right inside of you.
Yes, you do. So then that's the other thing, like believe in yourself, believe in your ability to have and be in really difficult conversations. Even, yes, it's going to be hard. It's going to, like, it might be the worst thing you do. And you will believe in yourself and your ability to get through it.
Thank you so much for giving us the motivation and power and skills needed to have these difficult conversations. I appreciate it because there are so many people who need to have these conversations at this time. A lot of people are in heavy places right now, and they need to be able to vocalize that they just don't have the capacity to be in relationships that aren't being reciprocated in the way that they need it to be. So thank you so much. Are there any last minute sprinkles that you'd like to share with the audience before we close out?
Last minute sprinkle that's on my heart and head this week, especially with the shooting in Texas, is how our capacity is changing. And the things that I'll say, used to do, let's say pre-pandemic, right? The capacity that we had pre-pandemic is not the capacity that we have now. And I believe people are slowly but surely waking up to that, especially with what has occurred this week, that there are just limits, and the limits are very different. And so I need to, yes, pay attention to what that new limit is. And it may change by the week, right? My capacity might look different, not just generally, and for this year, but I mean, like 1 week, my capacity might be this, the next week it might be this. And I need to pay attention to what that is and also communicate that. And so that's just one last sprinkle. It's a glitter sprinkle that I want to leave just around just being aware of what your capacity is, about how the world, work, everything that you do is impacting your capacity right now, like just right now.
Yikes. To everybody else who is screaming yikes with me, I love these permissions that Katrina has given us throughout this entire episode. We are allowed to choose ourselves. We are allowed to vocalize our needs. We are allowed to no longer preserve relationships. We are allowed to vocalize our capacities. Thank you so much for these permissions. And I know everyone will take it with you. To anyone who is listening to this, keep setting those boundaries and saying absolutely not to anything unaligned. We will see you next time. Bye.